Thank you, Your Honor. If it pleases the court. On January 19th of 2021, Tara Baker was going through her morning routine. What we know about Tara is that she was a very detail-oriented person, a very routine-oriented person, and she liked to get up around 6:30 in the morning and she'd take a shower. She'd eat her breakfast of cheese grits, good Southern staple. And then she'd go to her room to blow dry her hair, and that's something that would take her a while because she had so much hair. And there's no way that she could have known that she would have never gotten through that. At that point, the defendant, Edrick Faust, entered her home and attacked her from behind with a knife. You heard from Dr. Faust, who talked to you about the mechanism of that injury and the fact that it would have pierced her jugular vein and would have come from behind in this manner, which is consistent with the defensive wound that she has to her left hand. After he then bashed her head and strangled her and sexually assaulted her, Mr. Faust tried to cover his tracks. He tried to clean up as much as he could. He took the stove knobs off the stove where he had turned them on in order to light a blanket on fire and then light her bedroom on fire. And he exited the residence. He lived just under 2 football fields away, 585 feet. And he was likely very surprised that the home did not catch on fire the way that he expected it to. And he circled the neighborhood, wondering when this blaze would actually reach its full peak, and worried that it was not. And what you heard from Brian Grove, the ATF fire engineer in this case, is that under the environment that Mr. Faust had created, this would be a slow developing fire. It would be a fire that would be fed through the cycling on and cycling off of the HVAC system until the temperature reached such a level that it would cause a breakout in that top pane, which you have seen from the pictures, which then would create a ventilation increase that would let the fire reach its full level. This was all done in an effort to conceal his crime. Mr. Faust, when he committed this crime, did not take a weapon with him. He did not take elements to clean up after himself with him, the way that someone, if they had planned a crime over the course of several days to arrive in the middle of the night, would have done. The fire department arrived not knowing that they would find what they found inside. They entered the home. It was a home that was filled with smoke. They identified by looking around the home that the source of origin had to be in bedroom 3, Miss Baker's bedroom. They forced entry into Miss Baker's bedroom, and when they did, what they found was something that they were not ready for. They backed out. They called the police department. The police arrived on scene to find the badly burned and beaten, stabbed and strangled body of Miss Tara Baker. As it related to her murder, the evidence was always there. The world and technology just needed time to catch up to be able to deliver justice for her, and that's why we're here. That's why we've taken the time and asked you to take the time out of your lives to present the evidence that we have presented over the last 2 weeks that shows that Mr. Faust murdered Tara Baker. The police thoroughly processed the scene when they arrived. Although now Mr. Cruz wants to claim that this is a case about indifference, he wants to claim that this is a case about the ball being dropped and carelessness. In his opening statement, he called this one of the most thorough investigations in the history of the state of Georgia. What's changed is that the evidence against his client has been laid out, nothing else. It's one thing to pay lip service to law enforcement and first responders. It's another thing to actually recognize what the work they do, what kind of toll it takes on them. Where's the indifference in Lieutenant Liedall telling you he can still smell the shampoo in her hair? Where's the indifference in Bill Ricketts telling you that unlike a Super Bowl or a World Series, things like this are things that you never forget? Not only did the police use all of the tools and technologies that were available to them, you've heard from Agent Howe that they used innovative techniques, like trying to get fingerprints off Miss Baker's body using a negative lift technique. You've heard from both Lieutenant Liedall, who's well recognized in his field, as well as Agent Howe, who's well recognized in his field, that this is possibly the worst type of evidence or worst type of environment that you could have for trace evidence collection. But they still attempted to do so. The water, the smoke, the fire, the ceiling debris that fell on them led to a situation where the only trace evidence hairs that they could find would be hairs that you would normally expect in the home in abundance, as was testified to, because these are people who were regularly in and out of the areas of the house. The transformer box is not the murder weapon. The ligature, which was tested for DNA and only had Miss Baker's DNA on it, the knife that was used to stab her, likely the footboard where her head were bashed against were the murder weapons in this case. Not a power transformer box that was connected to a printer. But Mr. Melton's hair was found there. It absolutely was found there. But as both of the detectives who worked forensics in this case, Agent Howe as well as Lieutenant Liedall, told you, you would fully expect to find hairs of individuals who are regularly in and out of the home in those areas. Also, Mr. Cruz wants to talk to you about why Miss Baker's own hairs were in her hand. Well, as you heard from Mr. Peterson, a well-renowned expert in hair analysis, that is very common. And I think if we take just a moment to consider what happens as soon as any of us gets hit in the head, it makes perfect sense. The first thing that happens when you get struck with something in the head is that your hand goes up to your head. And so when someone has bashed your head against something, causing a serious injury that is testified to as a medical examiner as a contributing factor, it makes perfect sense that your hand would go to where you were hurt. And it's perfectly consistent with the experience of experts who do hair analysis. As part of the processing the scene, the entire scene was processed for fingerprints. There were no usable prints found. The screen, which was tampered with in a manner that was consistent with removing it, was processed, but unfortunately no usable prints were found on that item as well. And as the case languished for over 20 years while the police were looking for new leads, that screen was lost. We didn't try to hide that from you. We owned it from the very beginning. All this happened before I could drive a car. If I could go back and make sure that screen stayed in evidence, I absolutely would, but we can't. We have the case that we have. And I think it's important to talk about evidence, right? Mr. Cruz has access to the same physical evidence that the state has access to. And the defense has no obligation whatsoever to present any evidence. But he has access to that same evidence log that Agent Bigham made part of her case file. So if Mr. Cruz wanted you to see the keys, the defense has the opportunity to present that. It's in evidence, as Agent Bigham testified to. If Mr. Cruz wanted you to see the lock, he could present that. It's in evidence. But that's not what he wants because they're irrelevant, and he knows that. What he wants is to create the type of conspiracy theory that he's just told you in his closing argument you shouldn't follow as being reasonable doubt. And so I'm going to ask you in your deliberations to hold him to that. The police knew from early in the investigation. The autopsy happens the next day, and even when they arrive on the scene, it seems very likely to them that Miss Baker had been sexually assaulted while she was in the process of dying. As part of the autopsy conducted by Dr. Faust, he photographed and described injuries that indicated that Ms. Baker was stabbed from behind, strangled, and beaten, as well as sexually assaulted with forcible injuries, not just to her anus, but also her vagina. A fact that for some reason the defense regularly ignores and doesn't want you to think about. Dr. Faust, due to the fact that there were injuries and indications of sexual assault, did what he always does, which is to take oral swabbings, vaginal swabbings, and anal swabbings. Unfortunately, when the envelope was labeled, two things got labeled as oral swabbings, but we know that we have a vaginal smear as part of the evidence in this case. And there can be no vaginal smear without a vaginal swabbing. That's impossible. And so that's how everyone knows that one of those oral swabbings was a vaginal swabbing. In his opening statement, Mr. Cruz tried to tell you that the injuries to Mr. Melton's hands are from when he is strangling Miss Baker and she is clawing at his hands, and that the hairs in her hand are from in that fight against her attacker reaching up and pulling his hair out. He physically demonstrated that to you during his opening statement. How does that comport with what the actual evidence in the case is? It doesn't. Okay? And I don't want you to take any of this as some kind of attack by me on Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz has an incredibly important and constitutionally mandated job in this case, and that's to make sure, regardless of what the evidence is, that he does everything he possibly can to walk Mr. Faust out that door, even though he murdered Tara Baker. And that should be his job.
You may.
That is his job as mandated by the Constitution, and he is doing it as he should. But you have a different job, and I have a different job. My job is to look at the evidence, see where it leads, and then bring that before you so that you can deliver a verdict that speaks the truth. That's my job. Mr. Cruz has tried to manufacture moments of doubt for you. He has the same evidence log that Agent Biggin put in her case file that indicates that there were envelopes in which hairs were put and sent to the GBI, and then there are slides containing hairs that were done for analysis. Okay? And so this theater of opening up envelopes and creating what could be seen in out of context as some kind of moment of missing evidence is just a complete fabrication. The very next question we asked Lieutenant Liedall was, well, I mean, those are the envelopes you packaged the hairs in. You got any idea what the GBI did with them when you sent them over there? No. Then, as soon as we called the GBI witness, what did they all tell you? They almost looked at myself and Mr. Bolden like we had three heads when we asked them, well, I mean, after you take the hairs out of the envelope, you put them on the plating slide, you analyze them, do you then deplate them, put them back in the envelopes that they came in and send them back to the police department? And all of them looked at us and said, no, we don't do that. They remain plated. Well, because of course they do, because hairs are biological evidence and they will degrade over time if you maintain them in an environment after they've been sent for analysis in which they are not controlled, and so they stay longer on the plating and the glass. I'm sorry the slides broke. I mean, I think you could all see me and my anxiety level in the courtroom when we started taking the slides out of the protective cases because I was terrified that they would break. But it's been 25 years since this happened. And this case was cold for over 2 decades. It's something that's unfortunate that they cracked, but as everybody testified to, they were not cracked when they were analyzed, and it did not affect the integrity of the evidence. Ultimately, with the technology that was available over 25 years ago, law enforcement and the crime lab did not have the technology and tools with adequate sensitivity to identify the biological evidence that had been collected and preserved in the oral, vaginal, and anal swabbings that were taken. And we had to wait on the tools and technology to catch up. Besides collecting the physical evidence in the case, the police also did a canvass of the neighborhood. They did a canvass to see if anyone had seen anything, and they recorded whatever anyone would say. But at the time, they didn't have any leads to go on that yielded anything fruitful. They looked at every person of interest they possibly could. And this idea that political pressure is the reason we're here right now, if the police had allowed political pressure to guide their decisions, they would have arrested someone 25 years ago, but they didn't. They followed the evidence. They followed the evidence in the case. What we would ultimately learn is that Mr. Faust lived less than 2 football fields from Miss Baker. He lived just 585 feet with a direct line of sight to her home. We've learned that the description given by several witnesses in the area was consistent with Mr. Faust. At the time, we did not have him as a person of interest because he appeared nowhere in this case file that has tens of thousands of pages in it and over 100 hours of interviews. We would learn eventually that the sketch created by renowned forensic sketch artist Marla Lawson, based on the descriptions that were given by the people who saw Mr. Faust walking around the neighborhood, were consistent with Mr. Faust's appearance as it was just 2 weeks or so after the crime was committed. And we would learn that there's no connection of any kind before the morning of January 19th of 2001 between Mr. Faust and Tara when he left his DNA inside of her home after he had killed her. We learned that Mr. Faust's DNA was present in Tara's mouth and vagina, even though he denied ever having spoken with her or had any contact of any kind with her or anyone who lived in Deer Park. We learned that when he was given an opportunity to explain why his DNA was present, an opportunity that the defense has repeatedly said he was not provided, Mr. Faust chose instead to end the interview by asking to be taken to jail. But unfortunately for the Baker family and for everyone who knew, cared for, and loved Tara, it would take us decades to know those things about Mr. Faust and to know that he had killed and sexually assaulted Tara Baker. Law enforcement began doing everything that they possibly could to catch a break in this case. They began constructing a timeline of Tara's whereabouts, a timeline that the defense doesn't want you to pay attention to. Police also talked to Tara's roommates, Ashley and Valerie, and they told the police that no one had a key to the home besides the 3 roommates. Ashley in particular was very close to Tara, going all the way back to when they were in the same sorority at Georgia College. I think Ashley would have considered Tara her best friend, and she would have thought that the same was true of Tara. Ashley told you that Tara and Chris had a good relationship with nothing other than normal ups and downs of any relationship, especially one that had lasted as long as Tara and Chris's had, and that they were trying to find ways, as many people do in their early 20s, coming out of college, stepping into an environment where your academic challenges are much more significant, both in the stress and also the long-term impacts of it, and also into the world of working and trying to build a business for yourself, to do something good for the future that you hope to share with someone. And that Chris's work demands and Tara's school demands had made it to where they weren't able to spend as much time as they'd like to together. And that's probably one of the reasons that Tara was so excited about seeing Chris that weekend for her birthday, something that Ashley told you and that Chris told you. Police knew from speaking with Katie Lowenstein, who you heard from, someone who told you that her and Tara's friendship was one that started pretty much on the first day of law school and grew quickly through the crucible that is your first year. I mean, I remember my first year. I still have some of the best friends in my life from that time in law school because you're spending 11 or 12 hours going to class and studying, and you have this incredible pressure of performing in a very highly competitive environment in front of other people who are your peers, and it causes people to bond very quickly. You could see that in the pain that this still causes Katie 25 years later. And she told you that in all the time and experience that she had with Tara, the only impression that she got from Tara about her relationship with Chris is that it was a good, positive thing. She also told you, importantly for the timeline, that Tara was very committed that semester to her academic performance. She was going to be at the law library till 10 p.m. every night. Even when Katie left that night at about 9:15 or 9:30 to go home, Tara was staying because Tara was a routine-oriented person and a detail-oriented person and an incredibly hard worker who said she was going to stay at the law library until 10 p.m. and who had class the next morning. Katie told you about the type of friend that Tara was. You know, every friend group, I feel like, has the mom or dad friend who kind of watches out for everybody. And that's who Tara was. When she didn't call Tara when she got home, Tara called her. And we know that happened at 9:46 p.m. Tara also talked to you about the plans that they had for that Friday night and how Tara was excited about the weekend. As police investigated the case, as you've heard, they looked at Chris hard from the very beginning. That's where the police always look first, is at the romantic relationship or someone in a close relationship with the victim. You've heard that. Chris cooperated fully with police. Mr. Cruz claims that he didn't talk to Miss Virginia, Tara's mother. Well, that's not true at all. The way he found out is he called Miss Virginia back while he was at Truck Customs, and she told him what happened, and his first instinct was to go to the last place that anyone knew Tara to be. And so he went. And on the way, he called her roommates, trying to find them, calling their families, trying to see whether this was Tara or someone else. Chris wanted to cooperate because he thought by cooperating and giving as much information as he possibly could, it would move this investigation towards finding the person who killed Tara. He didn't know at the time that it would take 23 years, but it did. Chris and Tara had met at Georgia College. They hadn't gotten really serious until they both moved home. They had worked through a long-distance relationship. They had found a way to be together, and Chris had to move closer to where his work was once he decided to take the step, once he had found his place in the world in plumbing, to be something more than just working for someone else. He wanted to be something more because he was inspired and motivated by the way that Tara lived her life. And, you know, to Ashley, she sat up on the stand and she told you, you know, to me, it kind of seemed like it was a relationship that seemed destined to end. And I could see that. I mean, I'm sure Tara's family may not have felt that Chris, without a college degree and as a plumber, wasn't good enough for this woman who, by all accounts, sprinted ahead of the field all the time. She was on a mission to do the things that she wanted to do. But in this world, it does not matter what people on the outside of a relationship see or what they feel or expect. What matters is how the two people feel about each other. And what we know about how Tara felt about Chris and what Chris felt for Tara was that they loved each other. regardless of whether the world thought that they were similarly yoked or mismatched or anything else. And am I telling you that two kids that were 23, 24 years old were definitely going to get married and go on to live, together for the next 60 years until they pass away in bed next to each other? No, you don't know what people are going to do or how life is going to unfold. But what I'm telling you is there is not one shred of evidence, not one single shred of evidence that indicates that Chris Melton was angry with Tara, would hurt Tara, or wanted her dead. In fact, the exact opposite is what her best friend said. She said, he was the sweetest guy in the world. I never saw him be anything but kind towards her. I do think it's interesting that Mr. Cruz wants to tell you that a stamped, timed transaction from a bank that is over an hour from Athens, that blows a giant hole in the middle of his timeline, isn't relevant. Because to me, it is the most objective, relevant piece of evidence about Chris Melton's alibi. An alibi that is solid. An alibi that you can't call unconfirmed because Josh McCurdy confirms all parts of Chris's alibi for the morning of the murder. And Chris's father, who Mr. Cruz did not mention one single time in his closing argument, also told police that Chris was home that morning and he saw Chris get in the car with Josh McCurdy. Mr. Cruz knew that, which is why he needed to make this relationship between Josh and McCurdy and Chris Melton, who were work friends who never hung out outside of work, something more than it was. You'll recall in cross-examination, Mr. Cruz repeatedly asking David Griffith, the crime analyst with the Athens Clark County Police Department, well, they went to high school. You didn't know they went to high school together? They went to high school together. The words that the attorneys say are not evidence. The evidence in this case is that, in fact, they did not go to high school together and that they were just work friends who had known each other for a year. There's also this twisting of what people have said and what it means. Chris Melton said he had known Josh McCurdy for a year from working together in the same crew for someone else. And about a month before Tara was murdered, he had talked to Josh about coming to work for him. That's what the evidence is in the case, not some inconsistency between when Chris says he met Josh and when Josh says he met Chris. Josh picked him up. They go, and you've heard from Bill Ricketts, you've heard from David Griffith, that it is not unusual. People do not timestamp their lives for there to be some inconsistencies in when people went certain places or the order in which they went to certain places, or people to leave things out. If Chris was trying to manufacture an alibi, why in the world would he have not told the police about the bank until Sunday? It's because on Friday when he was talking to the police and he's trying to recall everywhere that he was that morning in the middle of this tragedy, he forgot. That's a completely normal thing, and you've heard the investigators testify about that. They go around, the rain prevents them from doing all of the work they need to do. They go to truck customs before lunch. They go to truck customs again after lunch, may have stopped by quickly right before lunchtime as well. And that's the point at which Chris gets a page from Miss Virginia Baker, Tara Baker's mom, and he goes straight to Athens. The police ask him to go to the scene and identify the body. He tells them he does not want to. When asked, and Mr. Cruz, again, is trying to twist Mr. Melton's words, he did not say, I didn't want to see the damage I had caused. He said he didn't want to see the damage he had caused. So Chris goes to the scene to ID Tara so that her family won't be forced to do it. After that, he goes to the police department because he wants to tell them whatever he can. He wants this crime to be solved more than he wants anything else in the world. Police listen to what Chris has to say, and the very next day start calling Bill Teeter and Josh McCurdy, who are the people that he identified, and they confirm the major points of his alibi. They later confirm his alibi further with his father and even further with the objective evidence from the bank. The evidence about the time of travel that the defense doesn't want you to know, doesn't want you to consider, because it blows a giant hole in everything that they're saying. When he came back on January 21st of 2001 to give that blood sample and to be interviewed further, he was talking to the same police officer, Bill Ricketts, who he saw on the first day. The police officer that showed you how he would roll his hands by touching each and every finger on January 19th, the day that Tara was murdered, each and every one, something that's recorded in Bill Ricketts' police report 23 years before Edrick Faust ever shows up in this case. That's the other thing the defense is trying to do. They're trying to act like all of these facts existed in the same environment, in the same moment, and that is not true. Bill Ricketts' police report indicating that he fingerprinted Chris Melton is from the time that he fingerprinted Chris Melton. It's nothing manufactured. It is an accurate recording of exactly what he did. And what he told you is that he and no other police officer that testified or any police officer in the Athens-Clarke County Police Department or GBI or anywhere else saw any injuries to Chris's hands, the things they would have absolutely been looking for because they were looking at him as a person of interest. Unfortunately, nothing broke. They couldn't get anything, and the case went cold. But eventually we caught up. Through the determination of a family in the face of unimaginable tragedy, through the fierce and unwavering love of a mother, Tara would not be forgotten. And the long and difficult journey to find justice for her and accountability for her murderer, Mr. Faust, never ended. The GBI Cold Case Unit was created to bring in fresh eyes and to use modern technology and tools to investigate cases where all leads have been exhausted and no likely perpetrator has been identified. I want to back up because I left something out on Chris's interview with Bill Ricketts on January 21st. He tells Bill Ricketts on January 21st that he and Tara had sex for the last time Saturday night into Sunday morning. That's what he says 2 days after the murder. That's what Bill Ricketts testified to here. So this idea, this false idea that somehow the first time that Chris Melton ever said that he had had sex with Tara within roughly 5 days of her being killed by Mr. Faust was in 2024 because Agent Bigham put that idea in his mind is completely untrue. It is completely false. Agent Bigham was reminding someone, as they would do for any witness in any case that had taken 23 years for them to talk to them for the first time, of the fact that, hey, at the time you said this, okay? And if Mr. Melton was trying to make up a story in order to make things make sense, then he would have just followed their direction. But here's the really interesting part about that. They were wrong at the time, and they just didn't know it yet as far as where the DNA was found, okay? And Mr. Cruz, although he's saying to you that he doesn't want to follow any conspiracy theories and that conspiracy theories are about reasonable doubt, is also trying to tell you that the time that the police and the crime lab were able to determine that what they thought about where the DNA was came from Agent Bigham, that's not true at all. You heard Ashley Hinkle testify on May 10th, the day after they interviewed Mr. Faust. The day after, they go back and they get a known sample. They take the known sample to the crime lab and they run it. And then what did Ms. Hinkle tell you? She's got these two things that are both labeled as oral swabs, but they're showing different results on profile. So what does that indicate to her in the context? Context is important of what we know about the rest of the evidence. We know from the medical examiner's report that there were vaginal, oral, and anal swabs taken. So I've got these two oral swabs. They're showing different results. This says that they're oral, vaginal, and anal swabs, and I've got a vaginal smear. Well, then one of these is not an oral swab. It's actually the vaginal swab. Well, how do we figure that out? Agent Bigham did an expert shot. If there were evidence of that, then Mr. Cruz has the ability to present it. No obligation, but the ability to, but there's not. They want the specter of things that they know not to be true. And so Agent Bigham takes the direction of the crime lab that says you should go see these people at Pure Gold. They're good at what they do, and they do it for all sides. And she sent the samples to Pure Gold. So we've got the two oral samples, and we'll talk about, go to the next slide. No, you're fine. Oral swabbings A, which was 2J at the crime lab. The profiles identified the first fraction skin cells.
Yes, sir.
Sakira Sim, she's a GBI crime lab scientist who testified that the first fraction skin cells, second fraction sperm, the first fraction matches Tara Baker. That makes sense. These are swabbings that are taken from the person of Tara Baker. Second fraction, Chris Melton, 1 in 8 octillion, Edrick Faust, 1 in 70 billion. So Mr. Melton's fraction longer, both, they're about, I believe, 7 or 8 billion people on the planet Earth. So just to put some context on that. Oral swabbing A when it gets to Pure Gold Forensics. Okay. What does Pure Gold Forensics do? They do a saliva test, a scientifically accepted test to determine where oral swabbings A came from. All right? It is positive for vaginal epithelial cells. So now it's negative for saliva and positive for vaginal epithelial cells. So now we know that oral swabbings A, which is item J, and this is the part where, you know, we got to figure out a new way to label things, I think. But oral swabbings A, which is item J, is an item that is the vaginal swabbings. Science led us here. Science identified the issue, science clarified the issue, because science is always advancing and science is objective. Mr. Cruz says that you should follow the science, but then he's trying to distort for you what the science did and how we got here. As it relates to oral swabbing B, which is crime lab item 2I. Profile, first fraction skin cells, second fraction sperm. First fraction matches Tara Baker. That makes sense. It comes from Tara Baker's person. Second fraction is placed into CODIS. That's the National DNA Database. On April 30th of 2024, Mr. Faust is identified as the major contributor. 1 in 30 octillion. A number that it's really, I mean, it's hard to put a number that large into context, but a number so large as to, you know, have a number of zeros behind it that I've never seen in any other context than DNA testing. Oral swabbing B, same thing, same process that they get put through Pure Gold. Even though we've already identified that oral swabbings A is vaginal, from the vaginal epithelial cells and from the non-presence of saliva, go through the same process with oral swabbing B. We're not going to make an assumption here. Positive for saliva, and then positive for human amylase, which is a compound primarily found in saliva and consistent with saliva. That's how we separated these two things. It has nothing to do with what needed to happen in order for an investigation to move forward or anything along those lines. Those are the types of conspiracy theories that Mr. Cruz himself has already told you is not reasonable doubt, but signaled the desperation of the defense to create and manufacture some doubt. Now, Mr. Cruz did ask Ms. Sims on cross-examination if she was aware that the GBI had done a test that showed that there was no sperm. What he failed to give her was the context that this was a test done in 2001, completely different equipment than what they do use right now. And, you know, Ms. Sims is probably younger than I am. And so, you know, I doubt that she has any familiarity besides reading in a textbook what the GBI was doing back in 2001. But we brought in Dr. Jennifer Corsi to testify. I was afraid for a minute I was going to mess up her last name there, but I think I got it right. To testify about the testing that they did do at the time. And yes, it was not positive at the time, but it was a less sensitive test than what they have available now. And that's what led to Mr. Faust. Not anyone trying to pin anything on anybody. But on April 30th, and I think it's important for you to keep this in mind, on April 30th, the GBI had an indication that they knew who had killed Tara Baker. But they didn't go arrest that person immediately. What they did is start to scour the case file again. Did we miss something that Edrick Faust and Tara Baker were connected in some kind of way? Did we miss something? Like, let's look through. And they spent 9 days before they arrested Mr. Faust, someone who had committed one of the most brutal murders in the history of Athens-Clarke County. They spent 9 days trying to run down any explanation they could possibly conceive of through the largest case file in one of the most thoroughly investigated cases in the history of the state of Georgia. And they couldn't. They couldn't establish one link between the two of them, because until the morning of January 19th of 2001, there was no link between Edrick Faust and Tara Baker, other than she lived close and he saw one car in the driveway. After that, they re-interviewed Ashley Hall. They re-interviewed Valerie Lowe. They re-interviewed Chris Melton, who was in the middle of watching his father, who was very close to die. His father passed away about 2 weeks after he was re-interviewed. They ended up, over the course of this investigation, as Agent Bingham testified to, re-interviewing about 30 witnesses, trying to make sure that they did as thorough a job as they possibly could. And then Mr. Faust was arrested, and he was given an opportunity to explain any connection he could have possibly had to Ms. Baker. He denied initially knowing anything about a murder in that area. And think about this. This is a place where he had lived for 40 years. They've been talking about Deer Park throughout the interview. And then they're talking about a murder. And then all of a sudden, he says, oh, you're talking about that murder oh yeah, the law student at UGA who lived right over there. Oh yeah, now I know what you're talking about, but I don't know anything about her. I saw her in the newspaper, but I don't know anything about that or anything else. They asked her, you ever had any contact of any kind with her? No, none. And then came the moment when he was confronted with something that he knew he couldn't explain without telling the truth. And that's that his DNA was inside Miss Baker's body, inside of her home. And he was asked by Agent Howell, help me understand. I'm here to exonerate just as much as I am to hunt. Help me understand. And his response was, take me to jail. Because he knew at that point that he had finally been caught. The next day, we've already talked about Agent Howell and Agent Bingham took the sample of Mr. Faust's DNA pursuant to a search warrant. They submitted that to the GBI crime lab, and that's when this issue with oral swabbings being mislabeled as vaginal swabbings was identified. We've talked about this manufactured doubt, the hair envelope versus the slides, the keys and the locks, Josh and Chris being friends from high school, which was completely untrue, trying to distort the way in which the DNA was mislabeled and claiming that people somehow moved DNA around, which is just a red herring conspiracy theory, the mischaracterization of what hair was. Because in the mitochondrial DNA, Mr. Cruz specifically was asking questions about whether or not Mr. Melton could be excluded. He's completely leaving out the fact that Ms. Hall, who was also a roommate of Ms. Baker's, also couldn't be excluded. The bodies on Tara's hair, I think it's on Tara's body, the hairs on Tara's body. I got it out the last time. The hairs on Tara's body are really important here because I think they put Chris's hair on the power transformer box in context. Both of Tara's roommates were found to have hairs on Tara's body, okay? And I think that's important for context about the hair on the power transformer box because it gives you an idea of how prevalent hairs from people who are normally in and out of a residence are. There's, you know, obviously Miss Hall and Miss Lowe had nothing to do with Tara's murder, and I think obviously once you look at all the evidence, Chris Melton couldn't possibly have committed the crime. And so it's important when you're looking at that single piece of evidence to look at the totality of the evidence. The defense wants you to pick little things and look at them in isolation rather than looking at all of the evidence together. Here's another thing about the evidence that I think is really, really important. It has to do with Ashley Hinkle's testimony, which is being mischaracterized by the defense. Mr. Melton's DNA is in Tara's vagina, okay? Only Mr. Faust's DNA is in the mouth. Mr. Melton and Mr. Faust's DNA is in the vagina. And then Mr. Melton's DNA is found at a rate, and I want you to think, again, totality of the circumstances, 1 in 60,000 as opposed to billions and octillions in the anal swabbing. What Ms. Hinkle testified is that that timer resets with penetration. She's not talking about penetration of the anal cavity by Chris Melton. What she's talking about is there's a 7-day detection timeline in the vagina. So when Mr. Faust rapes Ms. Baker vaginally, 5 days after Mr. Melton and Ms. Baker have had sex at her parents' house, that is the point at which the timer starts, when Mr. Faust has committed the rape. That's when it resets to, not this point middle of the week or that Saturday before. That's not what she was testifying to. That's not what the evidence is. And I would submit to you that when you're talking about matches in the tens of billions, 70 billion and octillions, and then you're talking about a fragment or a sample of DNA so small that it reduces to 1 in 60,000, you're talking about the type of DNA sample that comes from transfer or from drainage after a rape has occurred by Mr. Faust. That's completely consistent with the physical evidence. Mr. Cruz has tried to make a big issue out of Mr. Melton's hands. We've already talked about Bill Ricketts said, no, those injuries were not there on the 19th. But also think about how what Mr. Cruz has told you about the manner in which those injuries arrived on Mr. Melton's hands is not accurate. The strangulation did not occur with Mr. Melton's hands. They occurred with a ligature that Mr. Faust was using. And what did Dr. Falzon tell you about where hands would be for a ligature strangulation? It was very quick. I saw a lot of people taking notes. A ligature strangulation, the hands would be on the sides because you were pulling the ligature tight. So this which is what Mr. Cruz described for you, is wholly inconsistent with both the fact that she was stabbed from behind, likely the first injury when she was caught by surprise, had her head smashed against likely the bedpost, and then is on the ground semi-conscious being strangled. That's why there's no DNA except for her own underneath her fingernails, because she was largely incapacitated so early during this attack. That's why there aren't claw marks in Mr. Melton's face if she had been pulling at his hair wildly, as Mr. Cruz needs you to believe in order to show that his client didn't commit these crimes. He needs you to ignore the evidence. The reason that we asked y'all whether or not you believe that individuals, there's one right way to respond to trauma, is because, people respond to trauma in all kinds of different ways, okay? And I don't know if responding in a way that's different than what the majority of people would do is something that has really any evidentiary value that outweighs what the physical evidence and what other people are saying about the location of people tell us. Sorry, I took a lot of notes. There's been a lot made of the fact that we met with witnesses before trial. I mean, I'm unaware of any trial that's ever been conducted, certainly in a 25-year-old cold case homicide, where you wouldn't meet with the witnesses before you called them up to the witness stand. I mean, frankly, I'd fire anybody in my office who had a murder trial where they didn't meet with witnesses. So again, you can consider that in whatever capacity that you want, but it is a routine and expected practice, and it's basically malpractice not to talk to people before you call them as a witness in a trial. But again, that gets back to this, needing to throw these conspiracy theories out there. Mr. Melton's hands, why would you fingerprint him? The same reason that they collected hair samples from Valerie and Ashley and everybody else that's in and out of the house on the regular basis. It's so that if you have something, you have elimination samples. That was testified to during the course of the trial. Again, mischaracterizing the power transformer box as a murder weapon. It wasn't. I think all of these mischaracterizations, I think you should take in context of Mr. Cruz's own statement about if a person's not straight with you one time, then you're done with them forever. I mean, I think the defense has not been straight with you plenty of times during the course of this trial.
Okay, I'm going to overrule your objection. You may continue, Mr. Yellowman-Chili.
And Mr. Cruz is absolutely correct that Mr. Faust has no obligation to explain his DNA. I mean, he doesn't have an obligation to do it. He can't without admitting that he committed this crime. I agree with him that the state has the burden, and, it doesn't ever shift to the defense, and they don't have to prove anything. But he was given an opportunity to explain his DNA in his interview. And what he told police, what he told the GBI is just take me to jail. And that's because there is no obligation. Will you cue up the video?
Which number is that, the last one?
Man, it's been a long time. We've made so many advancements in things. if you can help us understand why your DNA is in that house, help us. I don't want to put your finger on the phone. Help us. I'm here to exonerate just as much as I am to hunt.
Y'all come on, take a little DNA, right?
Ladies and gentlemen, we've done everything we can with this case. It's gone through generations of police officers. We've run down everything we can with modern technology, and we've given you everything that you need to find Mr. Faust guilty beyond a reasonable doubt for each and every one of the offenses in this indictment. But my time with this pen is over. I can't write the last chapter. That's yours to do. Tara Baker was the kind of person who tried to bring happiness and joy to everyone in her life, everyone that she interacted with. She was someone so driven that she graduated with 2 degrees in 3 years. She was someone that had her entire life ahead of her, a life that she wanted to dedicate to helping people and making this world just a little bit better, one client at a time. And her loss isn't just a tragedy for her family. Her loss isn't just a marker that changed their lives forever. It's a loss for all of us. It's a loss for everyone in this community. It's, if she had settled somewhere else after she finished law school, it's a loss for that place. It's a loss for the world. And there's no measure of justice that we can provide that will change that. But what we can do and what we must do is speak the truth. That's what the word verdict means. It means to speak the truth. And the truth here is that Edrick Faust committed this horrific crime, that there was no connection between the two of them. There is no evidence of that whatsoever. And I'm asking you not to manufacture evidence the way that the defense has attempted to manufacture evidence in this case. Trust what you heard in the evidence from the witness stand and return that verdict that speaks the truth. And the truth is that Mr. Faust is guilty of each and every offense in this indictment. Thank you.